Are they arrows or are they bolts? In the last 8 seasons of Death by Bunjie, season after season, over 400 episodes, almost 500 episodes, I have referred to them time and time again as arrows, even though they're shot out of a crossbow. And I've occasionally gotten comments from people saying, hey, they're bolts, not arrows. Some of those comments are in capital letters, so that tells me that it's a pretty important subject to a lot of people. One of the biggest reasons that I call them arrows is because when I started into crossbow hunting over 11 years ago now, crossbows were on the out. They weren't widely accepted, not nearly as much as they are today. Compound bow hunters, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, wanted to keep crossbows out of the archery seasons. Now, in order to plant that seed in everyone's brain that crossbows are not archery equipment, the anti-crossbow folks specifically went out of their way to use the word bolt instead of arrow in order to sell that difference. In other words, see, they're not archery equipment. They don't even shoot arrows. To counter that, me and other crossbow advocates back in the day started using the word arrow all the time because, hey, these are arrows, right? They've got fletchings or vanes, they've got a nock, they have a shaft, they have a place for a broadhead or a field point to screw in. They are, in fact, arrows. And so I've gotten in the habit of calling them arrows. If we look back further in history, originally crossbows shot bolts, but understand that the crossbow that we're talking about when we talk about bolts is an ancient piece of equipment. It does not resemble what we're using in the woods today. Now, this is an Excalibur Firebolt made by Easton arrows. I shot dozens of deer with these arrows, made out of carbon, that sort of thing. This doesn't resemble the bolt of yesteryear. Very much resembles an arrow, doesn't it? I mean, it's got vanes or fletchings, which, whatever you want to put on there. It has a nock, right? It has the shaft. It has a spot up here where you can screw in a broadhead or a field point. It's an arrow by all stretches of the imagination. This is 20 inches long, however. Now, I do have this little guy right here. Now, I do not own a compound bow, right? Not anymore. I had one when I was in high school, but not since then. But it really, those arrows that I use in my crossbow really don't look much different than this guy that I purchased at Walmart. I bought this at Walmart, just bought one arrow just so I'd have something to show you to use in these videos. And this is a Wolverine Hunter, and it looks very similar to a modern crossbow arrow. Crossbow arrows have gotten closer and closer to compound bow arrows, and even more so now with these recent crossbow offerings. If you look at the new Barnett HyperTac 420, that crossbow does shoot a smaller diameter arrow. It is much thinner in diameter than these ProFlights, for example, that I currently use on Bunjie. But these arrows are 0.300 something, in diameter, whereas the new ones from the HyperTac, what that shoots, are more like this compound bow arrow. They are more thinner in diameter arrow. And that's something that crossbow manufacturers apparently are testing, that they are playing around with. Good for them. We'll see where that goes. One good place to look for the difference is in a dictionary, right? Let's look it up in the dictionary. What does the dictionary say about arrows versus bolts? It says an arrow is a shaft sharpened at the front and with feathers or vanes at the back, shot from a bow as a weapon or for sport. Well, that's also what we shoot out of crossbows. It's a shaft, right? Sharpened at the front with a little screw-on point, and it's got vanes, and it's propelled from a bow. Now, you might be saying, well, hold on there. It's propelled from a crossbow, not a bow. Well, I looked up the definition of crossbow, and we're going down the rabbit hole here. Do we really need to look at all this stuff? But when we look at the definition of crossbow, basically it's a bow. Pennsylvania defines a crossbow as a device consisting of a bow fixed transversely on a stock, the string of which is released by a trigger mechanism, has a mechanical safety, and propels an arrow. That is the definition of crossbow. Don't you love it when you look up a definition and you have to go look up another word to see what it means? Transversely, what does that even mean? I looked it up. It means situated or extending across something. It's, you got a stock and then you got a bow across it. That's all it means. Now we look up the definition of bolt and we get a bar that slides into a socket to fasten a door or window. I don't think that's the one we're looking for. Or we get a short, heavy arrow shot from a crossbow. And that, defines what this is. It's a short, heavy, that's a term of art, right, as a subjective term. But it's a short, heavier arrow shot from a crossbow. So fair enough, you can call this a bolt. Can't argue with that. I suppose if we take these two definitions and put them in a Venn diagram, it is safe to say that all bolts are, in fact, arrows. but not all arrows are bolts. Does that kind of make sense? Like based on these two definitions at least. In fact, when I look up the definition of crossbow bolt under Pennsylvania law, it defines a crossbow bolt as an arrow shot by a crossbow. So that's what Pennsylvania says about it. What about other states? I looked at New York, and this is kind of interesting. New York has some pending legislation that would allow crossbows in the entire archery season. That's awesome. New York has some pending legislation to remove the archaic restrictions that they have on crossbows up there. That's great. Come on, New York. One of the things that the new legislation does is it actually changes their legal definition of it from bolt to arrow. That's the proposal in New York. Come on, New York. In the end, to me, personally, it doesn't really make any difference. If you call them bolts, I know what you're talking about. If you call them bolts, I totally know what you mean. But when you send me a message about bolts, you'll probably get a reply that uses the term arrow. And I think you know what I mean. So in the end, it really doesn't make much difference. How's that? I hope you got a kick out of that video. Until next time, all hail Bunjie.